Hello and welcome back to the YouTube video. Today I'm doing the patch 25.20 Midlane Tierlist. So if you enjoy content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There are a couple of changes this patch. Most literally, we saw buffs towards the likes of Veigar, Anivia, Katarina, and Malphite. We saw adjustments towards the likes of Fizz, Orianna, and Azir. In the case of Azir, they ended up hotfix nerfing him like 2 days after the changes. They were supposed to be net negative in terms of his competitive strengths. They ended up overshooting and giving him a bit too much power later on to the game, so they've dialed some of that back. Overall, he looks to be in a weaker state. He's probably in a must-avoid kind of situation for solo queue at the moment. Whether they, I presume going into 25.21 or 25.22, they will end up readjusting him again to kind of give him back some power now that, like, the world's patch, which is this one, has gone by. But it was probably worth waiting and seeing. In the case of Orianna, they took away some baseline value out of the W. Commonly in competitive, what you'd see is people would put points in W earlier on into the game. This is kind of just to decentivize that. You're now probably just going to max Q in almost all situations. Putting points in W has substantially lost a lot of power. They gave back some power through like the AP ratio of the ability, though, going from 70 to 80%. So by 400 AP onwards, you are getting more power out of that ability. And if you max Q first, you're not really going to feel that power drop until like level 7 and then till 13 when you start putting a decent chunk of points into the ability. Let's get into the tier list. So the tier is going to consist of the same 5 champions. We lead off with Varus, who just doesn't perform that well in the mid lane at the moment. AP Varus has been in a pretty weak state for a while now. I believe you can still go for Ginsu's and Hexplate variants and find a bit more success on the champion. But overall, I would just recommend leaning towards other things in the current state of mid lane. Same goes for Smolder, same goes for Tristana. They've been stronger in previous iterations. Right now, their power has generally just been shifted away from being as good as a solo laner. I think Tristan as like a deep AD mid pick can still work, and Smolder as maybe a niche counter pick in certain matchups can also be fine as an option, but I wouldn't really recommend sinking time into them. It's just not really worth in their current state. Corki has also been heavily nerfed, not only for mid lane now, but also for bot lane. He is very unpopular in mid lane at this point, and I'd recommend basically completely avoiding him. He just doesn't have enough strength to really make up for the loss of power he's kind of had over time, losing things like the package, being kind of forced onto like AD centric builds where you're a lot more reliant on auto attacking, which is a lot more beneficial as like an ADC, but in mid lane where you want to, you usually are more focused around power within your spells, he's just not doing quite as well at the moment. That combined with the fact that he's just received a bunch of nerfs towards his baseline kit, and it is substantially weaker than what it has been in previous iterations. Azir, also just recommend kind of avoiding the champion at this point. It has been pretty heavily nerfed. The kind of power shift they wanted to go for was putting power into the late game, taking power out of the early. They've done this before, and then ended up kind of moving it back towards being more like a general, even though he still scales well, giving him some lane agency. This time they've kind of just stripped him away again of all of his lane agency, and the power they've kind of given back is very minimal compared to what he has lost. So I would recommend just avoiding Azir at the moment. Wait and see what kind of changes he receives down the line, because he probably won't stay in his current iteration. The C tier then, we lead off with Yone, who has been left weak because of his competitive presence. He is deemed to be number 1 AD mid option, and that has left him in a weaker state for solo queue. I think going into elite he does perform a bit better. For average play, I would kind of just recommend one of the other AD mid options. Jace and Gangplank are just elite skewed picks. I think if you're very comfortable on them, they can definitely work, but if you're not, then I would recommend completely avoiding them. That is kind of just the gist with these picks. They are high mastery champions, which reward you for putting a lot of games into them. Ryze and Taliyah have been nerfed pretty heavily for their competitive strengths, and are just a bit on the weak side for solo queue at the moment. 2 picks I would kind of just recommend avoiding. In the B tier, we lead off with Lissandra, who is just a bit on the weaker side at the moment. I think if you use her as a niche counter pick, you can still kind of get value out of the champion, and I don't think she's horrible. I think she can still sit within the B tier, but she's definitely on the weaker side compared to what kind of strength she has. I would recommend looking towards other picks at the moment. Twisted Fate, I really dislike him as a champion, so much so I'm kind of tempted to put him into the C tier. He is a lower agency in terms of his damage output champion, which relies on kind of the gold card and being able to be around the map to kind of get value out of the pick. Right now, I just don't think it's great for average solo queue. He does perform a bit better in elite, and obviously as an extension of that, a bit better in competitive. But I still don't even like him that much in Elite and Competitive. I think there are just better mid lane options to kind of lean into, and unless you get a very specific matchup which you know you can kind of exploit your global pressure with, or you know you can kind of play into the side lanes, he's just not as good as like other options at the moment. And he over nerfed for competitive. They wanted to kind of take her out, nerfed her W pretty heavily, nerfed her early magic pen on the ultimate, and she's just in a bit of a weak state for solo queue at the moment, so I do have her towards the lower end of the B tier. Aurora, another champion which has kind of suffered from being just innately elite skewed, and some of her competitive presence has also like landed her with nerfs. For average play, she's a bit on the weak side. I think if you put Mastery into her though, she could still be a good option. She just sits below like some of the other more mainstream mages, which I think just have slightly less aggressive elite skews to them. As Aurora, you do need to sink a decent chunk of time into her to kind of get value out of the pick. Gragas, a pretty niche mid lane option, very unpopular, mostly played by like a base of OTPs. I think if you're comfortable with a champion, he can be fine, like he can work pretty well if anything. If you're not, then he probably just ends up being a void champion. Like, you need to put some time into him. You can't just pick him like first time, or even with a limited amount of mastery. You need to actually have invested a lot of time into him to kind of master the combos and kind of understand where the power lies within the kit. Twitch, pretty solid mid lane option. I think AP Twitch mid has kind of found his like foundation of a champion. If it was slightly stronger, I think he would easily compete with some of the A2 options, and I still think he can. I still think there is definitely like strengths to the kit, and obviously having invis, the capability to roam, the W being a very strong slow, kind of like providing some level of control within areas. I think his kit is very unique in the way he functions. I just don't think it's quite strong enough to compete with some of the A2 options though at the moment. If it was like, if he had slightly better AP ratios on maybe the E or the passive, then yeah, I would honestly like bank him against some of the mainstream AP mid laners at the moment. Kiana, Talon, once again, all my like assassins within the B tier. I think these picks can all be really good if you invest a lot of time into them. They do need time investment though. If you're not willing to sink the time into them, they end up just being worse options than the things around them. Maybe pick one or two, or if you enjoy the class, that's just like the playstyle you're going to kind of lean into, and then find your strengths and like play off of them. Katarina got buffed this patch, 3 armor, really nice for her. She could, I mean, Katarina's one of those champions where if you're good at the pick, she can beat like a lot of the mid lane pool, and if you understand how to like utilize the strengths of the champion, she can stomp a lot of games. If you're not comfortable with it, she looks like one of the worst mid laners in the game. That's the kind of champion she is. She's probably the most egregiously like mastery skewed assassin at the moment, where you just need to have a lot of time into her to kind of really understand your limits and how to kind of snowball the champion within the game. I also have Akshan amongst these, because I think Akshan kind of leans into this like assassin archetype where if you understand your limits and how to kind of snowball the champion, he can be really oppressive. If you're not comfortable, then he looks pretty underwhelming compared to other options around him. Malphite is actually going to be bumped up, so I won't talk about Malphite. Cho'Gath, AP Cho'Gath is not as performant these days. It took a pretty sizable hit back when Shurelia's was a bit better of an item. They nerfed Shurelia, they nerfed the build, and like his like the way he wanted to like max his skill order. It's now lent more towards tank, and I think you can play tank Cho'Gath mid as well. Like I think both can be fine in the right spots. He's just no longer as blindable, and I think when he's not blindable, you end up like with a slightly worse off champion. So I have him in the B tier at the moment. Asol, bit of a weird one. I think Asol's kind of he's a champion which, if you understand how to kind of get your stacks and like advantages early, can be quite good, like actually quite oppressive as an option. If you kind of just like play him as like a stacking champion, you don't really interact with your laner early, I just don't think he's that great at the moment. Like I think you actually have to understand kind of the curve of the pick to kind of get the value out of the champion later on into the game, because otherwise you just end up being a bit too slow on the map. So I recommend investing time into him. If you feel comfortable with the playstyle and you get like you're able to get ahead and get like those advantages you kind of want to be that late game monster of a champion, then I think he can be really good. But if you're not comfortable with it, it's probably better just to look towards other mid lane mage options at the moment. He's not in his best state. I also don't think he's horrible at the moment. He just requires some level of time investment. Orianna remains within the B tier. The changes ended up being pretty net neutral. Like for solo queue, obviously people consistently maxed Q over W. It's going to be felt more uncompetitive for sure, and Orianna's kind of presence will probably dip a slight bit. She was kind of deemed to be the number 1 mage alongside Rise and Azir. I mean, Azir obviously got banned a lot, but now I think she'll probably just end up dropping a slight bit in prio. Some people, I mean, she'll still probably be one of the top mid laners. I don't doubt that, but definitely not quite like the same level of repression. So look, yeah, remains as a B tier pick. I think if you're comfortable with the champion, I really recommend her. I really like the playstyle of the Orianna, but if you're not that comfortable, then yeah, the changes didn't really like force you to play her. If you wanted to play her before, you can still play her. If you don't want to play her before, this isn't like suddenly the jump on the moment for the champion. Ziggs is a fine artillery mage. I prefer the other options over him. Like, I prefer the Vel'Koz and the Xerath, and there are other champions which kind of lean into the similar archetype. Like Syndra and Hui have range kind of like within their kits, but not like the consistent range. So I wouldn't really broadly call them artillery mages, but that's a whole different discussion. Ziggs, I think he sits as a solid B tier artillery mage. If you want to play him, then you can definitely make him work. But I recommend the other two over him. I think they're just slightly stronger at the moment. I do think Ziggs, if you want to play him bot, though, is also really good as an option. Silas, I think if you utilize him as a counter pick, can be really good. If you're not comfortable playing Silas or like with the aggression of the champion, he's not necessary at the moment. He's not in his strongest state, but I don't think he's bad by any means either. So definitely something you can lean on to. Galio definitely took a bit of a hit with the nerfs he received not too long ago. I have him in the B tier because I think he's back to being just a counter pick option. If you find the right matchups or the compositions where you can kind of really utilize the effectiveness of your ultimate, I think he's a good champion. If you're not, then he definitely struggles early. Like, early game Galio really like is punishable for like the first 5 to 7 levels of the game. Definitely before he gets like access to like his points within Q, he's quite like gatekept by that at the moment. But once he gets access to components and yeah, you get the points in Q, he definitely becomes a lot more oppressive of a champion. So there's still that to go on, but yeah, a bit weaker now. Definitely lost some power with the recent nerfs to the champion. Mel sits within the B tier. She is an A, or maybe even S tier option if you max E. I say this every time, people don't max E on this champion, and she just ends up being a weaker option for it. If people play the champion correctly, or I mean, in this case, max the champion correctly, she's really good. I genuinely recommend her as an option. The recent passive buffs were really, really like nice to kind of put her back on the map as like a genuine option. Utilize her as a counter pick to like the Ahri maybe, but it's definitely one of the spots where she like seems to really shine at the moment. Moving up from the B to the A tier are Fizz and Malphite. In the case of Fizz, the recent changes ended up being slightly net neutral, slightly net positive rather, not hugely. Like, I think you're still going to utilize him as a counter pick assassin, but he was only just like put down to the B tier. I think I moved him down in the patch before, and I'm gonna bump him back up to the A tier because the changes were nice. And I think Fizz is a champion. If you can utilize him as a counter pick, it's really good. He's a very effective like anti-mage assassin. Can definitely bully out some of those in the right situations. Malphite, free armor, really good for him. Helps him in the matchups where you want to be playing him. Combined with the 10 more damage on E. Baseline damage for a tank is really valuable. So yeah, I'm gonna bump him up to the A tier. I think he has a bit more individual agency now, and that's really big for a champion like Malphite. I've say this all the time about tanks, but if you are playing a tank and you don't do enough damage to really like individually pose that much of a threat, you end up just not being that valuable in like lower MMR brackets. It changes quite aggressively the higher up you go. Like in competitive and elite, it's completely different. But in like average play, you need individual agency. You want to be able to kind of carry the game by yourself, and having the tools to kind of do a bit more is really, really effective. So yeah, gonna bump him up to the A tier. Both the AP and the tank variants can be played in the right games, and make sure you're banning Silas if you're planning on blinding him, but you really shouldn't blind him still. He's still kind of just a counter pick option. The A tier then, lead off with Aurelia. Same goes for Aurelia, but that's always been the case, is if you're comfortable with the champion, then she's really good at the moment. If you're not, she's a must avoid. She requires a lot of mastery and a lot of understanding to kind of exploit the value, like the strength of her laning phase. And if you're just not comfortable with it, then she just ends up being a really bad option. She needs to get ahead, and she needs to be able to snowball the game, because if you can't, then yeah, she just gets outscaled by the tempo of the game. That's she's like one of the most early game scoot champions at the moment. Like that's kind of the archetype she really leans into. Zoe, I have her in the A tier. She's kind of found her footing a bit more over the last like couple of patches. She obviously got nerfed, I believe, in like 5 to 6 patches ago, I can specifically remember, which ended up being like relatively net negative, net neutral. It didn't really change it a huge amount. It took away some of her early power, gave it back through like some of her late. I believe it was some AP ratio. Yeah, generally I think Zoe is just doing a bit better at the moment. She seems to be a bit more popular in her current state, and yeah, it makes sense. The champion does a lot of damage. The bubble is a really powerful spell, and if you understand how to execute her kit, she is very, very oppressive in lane still. Some of your more just like traditional, I mean, like mid to low elo mages included the likes of Veigar, Morgana, Brand, and Malzahar. I think Malzahar, actually, no, I think Brand and Malzahar are probably the weaker of the four at the moment. They're not bad. Like I have them in the A tier for a reason. I think they're like very simple to kind of like wrap your head around, and I love recommending these champions for mid to low elo, because of the like simplicity and the kind of mental stack. How would I describe it? They take away some of like the things you have to really think about, so it ends up not being as taxing on just like your mental, being able to like kind of trivialize CSing and trivializing how to like do damage output and really focusing on kind of like other aspects of the game can be really nice. I think long term they can be damaging. Like it ends up being a crutch more than anything. So just playing them if you like if they're basically good for like LP. Like if you just want to like climb and like get LP fast, then they are the kind of champions you can lean into. Low barrier to entry kind of options. Veigar got buffed this patch, makes him a lot more appealing of an option. More AP ratio on the W makes that spell really like potent, and it already is a very potent spell, so having just genuine power like put into it at all stages of the game helps his wave clear, helps his ability to take objectives. Like later on in the game, Veigar is a very good objective taker. Just generally his damage output is a lot nicer now. So yeah, I think Veigar becomes a lot more appealing of an option. Morgana, obviously, the kind of recent adjustments she's received has brought her back onto the table as like a genuine mid lane option. I think people are actually like it's nice to see like people like kind of bringing in a new pick. She's obviously become a lot more popular over time, and there are lots of matchups where she can be really, really potent and really, really viable as an option. So I recommend her very nicely as like an A tier option. Some of the kind of options which I'm kind of considering dropping down include the likes of Akali and Victor. They're just not that performant at the moment and haven't been as performant for a while. Victor obviously has suffered from direct nerfs a while ago, but generally itemization hasn't been too nice to him, combined with other champions around him just being buffed. I think he deserves to be put towards the top of the B tier now. I still like him as an option, like him, Orianna, Akali, Mel. I really like promoting these picks. I think they are just generally really nice champions to have within your arsenal, which can be brought out every so often. Akali is one of the more simpler mages, but she's definitely... I think she's not benefited from some of the champions around her being buffed, combined with I think there's just a bit more health itemization being kind of opted into, which she's definitely suffered with. We've seen it through like Liandry's mages again, and just generally people picking up MR, and that is punishing for her. Overall, though, she's just suffered. I mean, like a lot of the bottom of the A tier, they've just suffered from other things being buffed around them, and considering this was a bit more of a buff-heavy patch, these two I am just dropping down to the B tier. LeBlanc, I have her in the A tier at the moment. The recent W buffs to her were really nice. She's not like a high A tier option, but if you're very comfortable with champion, then yeah, she can really snowball and take over games. I think a lot of these like lower A tier options are better in elite. I think they like are very, very potent when like you have a lot of mastery on them. But for average play, I don't recommend them quite as highly as like your Morganas, your Vegas, for example, because the barrier to entry is a bit higher on those champions. Ari, I have her in the A tier. The recent buffs to her ultimate were really nice. I'm actually surprised they kind of shifted her as much as they did. I still think she has a baseline issue with her like durability. And I mean, I played Ari more recently, and it is noticeable. You feel very squishy in certain matchups. But like the power within the ultimate, that is just seemingly where Riot are putting a lot of like her agency. And yeah, I mean, the buff was nice. It gives her more damage, more consistently being able to execute targets, allows you to get more resets, and that is really helpful in a champion like Ari. Sion, he's in a really good state at the moment. Great for just stonewalling a lot of the current mid lane pool. Being able to itemize things like Hollow Radiance or Kaenic denies a lot of mages from being able to do anything. You can still just go Sunfire into like unending despair against your AD champions and be really, really unassailable. He also got buffed more recently, and the buffs were nice for just a bit more individual agency, so the champion sits within the A tier at the moment. Nefiri, a bit more of a niche AD option. Don't think she's bad by any means. She's probably like the third one down. I think Garen and Yasuo I have slightly over her. And obviously already is like the elite skewed like high mastery one, albeit you still want to put mastery into the likes of Yasuo and to an extent Nefiri, albeit her barrier to entry isn't quite as high. But that's kind of like how I'd rate the AD mid pool at the moment. If you're comfortable with Yasuo and you can find the right games to play him in, he's a really good option. Garen is just generically probably your best default within the A tier. Not the best in the mid lane, because I do think Quinn and Pantheon are slightly higher than a lot of these at the moment, either because they have more specific matchups or are just generally really strong. But I think there is a pretty solid AD mid pool at the moment, and yeah, these are some of the champions I would have within it. Some of your more niche options includes the likes of Vex, who I think generally is just a good counter pick option. Not a lot of people play her, and obviously she's like kind of just fallen into that state of just being a bit more of a niche champion. I think if you utilize her as counter pick, and you should be perfectly fine in like where you play the pick. I don't think she's bad. I don't think she's insane either though. It just ends up being a case of, yeah, utilising her as an effective counter pick. Nivea got buffed this patch, puts her as a pretty solid A2 option at the moment. I think the champion, just having more haste on Q, 1 second off that ability, come over base damage on E, really big, like, okay, not big. They are good buffs though. They are the kind of things which Nivea really benefits from. Didn't really move her win rate a huge amount, which is a bit more surprising. I thought it would honestly shift her a lot more. But she does benefit from those kind of changes, and she was a bit on the weaker side compared to where she usually is as a champion. So yeah, gonna like push her back towards the top of the A tier. Definitely benefited from those changes. Swain, I think if you utilize him as an effective counter pick, still a really good option. I really like him as a pick, being able to kind of be played into like some of these low damage, high HP pool compositions, and just effectively get multiple rotations of your ultimate combined with a lot of health stacking through your E. It's really big for the champion. He has a lot more agency within laning phase these days as well though. Like if you opt into like an airy setup with like Scorch and you're just blasting people in lane with your Q, it feels a lot more satisfying. I don't know about the old change though. I don't like the old change that much. Being like the recast change, I find a bit it's a bit weird compared to like the old Swain. I say old Swain. There's been like 4 different iterations of the current Swain. But the one before this, Heimerdinger, I have him within the A tier. I think the champion is a very good niche mid lane option. He's not popular. But that is to the strength of the champion. People don't understand how to play against him, and he can be really oppressive at almost all stages of the game. So I think if you want to play the champion, definitely something worth putting time into. If you don't, then he's not mandatory by any means, but he can definitely be a good like a fun champion to kind of put some time into and just like seeing if you really like want to stick with him. Nico is a bit elite skewed in the mid lane, and well in the support role for that matter. She's early game skewed, and she has pretty in-depth mechanics through the W and how you just kind of effectively want to use her kit, which does make her have a barrier to entry. Overall, I think she sits within the A tier. Maybe not a high A tier option, and obviously her popularity in mid lane has very, very aggressively died down. Like she is, I mean, she's basically a support at this point, which is kind of unfortunate to see, because I think Nico, when she's like healthily played between the two roles, is an interesting champion. But yeah, right now, definitely not in her most popular state. But that also, like Heimerdinger, is the strength of the champion. If they're niche, people won't understand how to play against them quite as effectively. Kassadin and Kennen remain as A tier options. Kennen, I had him in the S tier, but I've kind of dropped him down because he also kind of falls into this category of just being a bit more niche. People don't like the strength of these kind of champions, and as I was saying for like Singed, albeit Singed is very unpopular, is people don't understand how to play against them. If people understood how to play against the champion, they become a bit more punishable, the windows become a bit more apparent, and I think that as a strength, it's obviously a strength, but it's also a crutch at the same time, which is why I don't think they quite they shouldn't sit in the S tier at the moment, but as like high A tier options and like for kind of champions which if you want to invest time into can be really valuable. In the case of Kassadin, he got buffed more recently, and it makes him a very effective counter pick. I like recommending him as an A2 option now. It's strange because I wouldn't even be surprised if they nerfed Kassadin. Riot seem to have a pretty aggressive stance towards if Kassadin is good, then he should probably be nerfed, which I don't know if I quite agree with, because obviously Kassadin, you're giving away a lot of early game agency to kind of pick a champion, which obviously is going to scale a bit better within the game. But right now, yeah, he's doing quite well. I'd say he sits as a great A-tier counter pick. The other options in the A tier include some of your more artillery kind of like centric options, including Vel'Koz, Lux, and Xerath. In the case of Lux, she's just very snowball reliant. You need to get the ball rolling. You need to kind of effectively utilize her passive and her early game base damages to kind of get an advantage. If you don't do that, then she just ends up being not as good as other mid lane options. Her wave clear is incredible though, and her just outright burst potential is really nice. If you can get the ball rolling, she's a great option, and I think she's a pretty slept on A-tier mid laner, albeit she's obviously very popular within low elo brackets. Xerath and Vel'Koz, I think, are just very good premier kind of artillery options. I really like recommending these champions because they have very clear kind of strengths within the game, and if you can effectively just play on mid waves, blast people with like the damage these champions provide, I think they're great picks. They do obviously have archetypes which counter them, primarily just being assassins, but if you kind of utilize them sparingly as counter picks, they're great champions. They have very clear like win conditions, and that is a very nice thing to have. The two champions I'm dropping down are Vladimir and Hui. I don't think they're bad. I just don't think they're quite the S-tier caliber of some of the other options I have there at the moment. In the case of Hui, he just has a barrier to entry, which I think might not really be quite as... like, it probably doesn't warrant him an S-tier spot. If he was any better, then I'd probably keep him in the S-tier. He's already good though. Like, the damage this champion can provide, combined with just having general utility, crowd control, it gives him very clear strengths. The issue is, obviously, he's a mobile, and if you're not comfortable with rotating the abilities, you can feel a bit, like, useless within some games. But generally, if you're clearing waves, if you're kind of getting to your mid-game stages, you have your 1, your 2 items on your Atacans and your objective fights, this champion can print damage, and print damage from range. Like, he is pretty unassailable if you kind of utilize your CC and your, like, your slows effectively. In the case of Vladimir, Silver Champion's really good, and I think if you can get lanes where you can freely scale and kind of take over, combined with like the damage this champion can provide, it makes him very effective. But you are obviously you're giving away some level of early game agency. He's not one of the better early game mages, and I think if you're not that comfortable executing the combos and kind of understanding how to get the damage out of this champion, he does end up feeling a bit more lackluster. But probably also just ends up falling into a bit more of a barrier of an entry kind of the category. But I don't think it's quite as high as maybe Hui, but that's obviously up to debate. I still think both these champions are really good mages if you just understand like where the strengths and how to play them. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the gist of them. So the S tier then. Quinn and Pantheon are still like my AD S2 options. I think Pantheon is a really good mid lane pick, great for shutting down assassins and high mobility skirmishers. He's fine into mages. I wouldn't recommend picking him maybe per se into some of the pool. He can definitely like get poked out or struggle to really like assail them. But generally, like if you can just get into Q range or you can get into W range, then most champions will have a hard time at dealing with him. Mid is also the role where he is like the most value out of his ultimate and just his ability to kind of skirmish and scrap with people. I think mid lane Pantheon is just, in a really good state at the moment, so I have him within the S tier. Quinn got buffed more recently through Profane being cheaper, and having that spike early on to the game makes it an incredibly effective mid lane option. The wave clear combined with, just the global pressure she can provide makes her really, really powerful in that regard. You can feel quite squishy, and if you don't get ahead, then the champion will definitely feel outvalued by other things, but you will consistently get ahead. The strength of this champion is that you are just you can collect resources so effectively around the map, and like kills for that matter, and just disrupting the kind of flow of the game makes her an incredibly valuable option. If you're looking for AP options though, I think there are a plethora of picks. Cassiopeia, great into short range mages as like this high DPS kind of like mid-range threat, which can take objectives, scrap really well with champions on like 1, 2, 3 items. Generally, yeah, just effectively use her as a counter pick, and I think she's really good at the moment. Syndra's recent buffs were massive for her. She once again solidifies herself as a great S tier pick. Probably my recommended default to go to like mage. Just putting a lot of time to her will be really rewarding in the current state of the game. If you're looking for something which scales a bit better though, I think Kayle is in an incredible state at the moment and has been for a while. It's really hard to assail her. She outputs a huge amount of damage later on into the game, and like, she's, a lot of her weaknesses within top lane are just not exploitable within mid lane. The longer lane, the kind of, the issue of not having a, like, what you'll usually have is, like, you'll have dual damage threats when you're playing Kayle mid. More consistently, you'll have, like, a tank or a bruiser within the top lane, which can just act as more front line for you, making her, once again, more effective as a champion. So, Kayle, yeah, I think she's very clearly an S tier mid lane option. And then your two AP assassins are Echo and Diana. Both these picks, I think, have been really good for a while now. Diana is really, I think people don't expect just how good of a laner she is, and being so oppressive with just like the sweeping Qs and the range she can kind of have with that, combined with her ability to just like burst targets down and fight objectives with her ultimate. It just makes her a very powerful option. In Echo's case, it's more of just the hit and run playstyle. It's the fact that you can just do so much damage and then obviously like ult out or utilize the kind of like the kit to kind of find angles which can really punish some of the mages. I mean, it makes them a very good mage counter pick option. I think having, I mean, I'd either recommend him or Fizz as one of your champions within your pool can be a really effective way of just having an answer to someone who really likes blinding mages. Obviously, that's more like the competitive like standpoint which I'm taking, but generally in solo queue, if someone I know plays a Syndra to you, just being able to drop like pick a Fizz or pick an Echo can be really, really powerful in the right situations. And overall, those are my thoughts. So thank you guys for watching. I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.